The severance papers felt like a death certificate for a life I hadn't finished living. One moment, I was the architect of Project Nightingale's market strategy. The next, I was a ghost haunting the halls of my own career, watching my boss, David, preen over the tombstone he'd so graciously engraved with my name. He had stolen my work, inverted my conclusions, and presented my meticulously researched warning as a glowing prophecy of success. The blood in my veins turned to ice as I watched him accept the CEO's handshake, the credit for my sleepless nights and my analytical soul. His smile was a slash of victory, a promise of the oblivion he'd cast me into. They took my ID badge, but they couldn't take the memory of his treachery. And in the silence of my eviction, a new, cold purpose began to bloom in the ashes of my old life. He didn't know it yet, but David had just signed his own death warrant. The walk of shame from the CEO's office was a masterclass in corporate cruelty. Flanked by a security guard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, I was paraded past the glass-walled offices of my colleagues. Their faces were a gallery of curated reactions: pity from the interns, schadenfreude from my rivals, and a chilling, practiced neutrality from those who knew the truth but valued their paychecks more. My own office, a space I'd personalized with academic accolades and photos from industry conferences, was already being stripped bare. My files, my data, my entire professional identity, boxed up like evidence from a crime scene. And in a way, it was. David had murdered my reputation, and our CEO, Marcus Thorne, a man whose ambition was eclipsed only by his aversion to bad news, had handed him the weapon. Thorne hadn't even looked me in the eye. He'd stared at a point just over my shoulder as he delivered the verdict. Your pessimistic outlook and clear lack of team spirit have become a liability, Chloe. The words were so corporate, so sanitized, they were almost comical. I hadn't been pessimistic, I had been realistic. My report on Project Nightingale, a ridiculously overpriced and undertested piece of consumer tech, was a symphony of damning data. The focus groups I ran were a disaster. Participants found the interface confusing, the battery life abysmal, and the design, which David adored, tacky and cheap. My conclusion was unequivocal. Launching Nightingale would be a multi-million-dollar catastrophe. David, my direct superior, a man whose primary skills involved choosing the right tie and delegating blame, had seen my report not as a warning, but as an obstacle. He'd called me into his office, his face a mask of patronizing concern. "Chloe, this is just so negative," he'd sighed, gesturing at my data-rich appendices with a dismissive wave. "We need to champion innovation, not suffocate it with spreadsheets." The next morning, he championed innovation by stealing those very spreadsheets. He'd lifted my presentation template, cherry-picked a few vanity metrics, and fabricated the rest. My stark warning of market rejection was magically transformed into a forecast of unprecedented success. He presented it to Thorne as his own bold, contrarian analysis, painting me as a disgruntled naysayer trying to sabotage his vision. The betrayal was so absolute, so audacious, it left me breathless. I was fired not for incompetence, but for the unforgivable sin of being right when a powerful man needed me to be wrong. The elevator doors slid shut, and I was officially erased. The weeks that followed were a thick, gray fog of despair. The first casualty was my routine. The 6 a.m. alarm, the ritual of coffee and market news, the commute, it all vanished, replaced by a suffocating expanse of empty time. I'd wake up to the phantom sensation of a deadline, my heart pounding with an anxiety that had nowhere to go. My apartment, once a sanctuary from the corporate battlefield, became a prison. The silence was the loudest thing in it. I tried to be productive. I polished my resume, updated my professional networking profiles, and began the humiliating dance of the job hunt. But David's poison had a long reach. Recruiters who had once courted me were now politely noncommittal. "The market is tight right now," they'd say, a coded message for "we heard what happened." My professional network, once a source of strength, became a minefield. Calls to former colleagues were met with awkward pauses and hasty excuses. I was radioactive. The financial pressure began to mount, a slow, crushing weight. I watched my savings account, the fruit of a decade of hard work, dwindle with every rent payment and grocery bill. The confident, articulate analyst who could command a boardroom was replaced by a woman who spent hours debating whether to buy the brand name pasta or the generic. It was a daily erosion of my self-worth. Worse than the financial strain was the psychological warfare I waged against myself. In the dead of night, David's narrative would creep into my thoughts, its toxic tendrils wrapping around my confidence. Was I too negative? Was my analysis flawed? Did I miss something? I'd pull up my original Nightingale report on my personal laptop, poring over the data again and again, searching for the error that would justify my exile. But it was never there. The data was sound, the conclusion inescapable. The product was a dog, yet the doubt lingered, a testament to the power of a well-told lie. My family, meaning well, only made it worse. "Maybe you should have just toned it down a bit, honey," my mother suggested over the phone, her voice laced with the gentle disappointment that was her specialty. "You know how men like that can be. You have to learn to play the game." My father, a man of few words, simply sent me links to articles about the Great Resignation, as if my public execution had been a lifestyle choice. They didn't understand the violation. To them, I had lost a job. To me, I had lost a part of myself. The isolation was the final turn of the screw. Friends, busy with their own careers and families, would offer platitudes. "You'll bounce back," they'd chirp, before steering the conversation to safer territory. The invitations to dinner parties and weekend getaways slowed, then stopped. I was a downer, a living embodiment of professional failure, and no one wanted that specter at their brunch table. My world shrank to the four walls of my apartment and the sterile glow of my laptop screen. I was drowning, and no one was throwing me a rope. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. This was the true triumph of David's betrayal. He hadn't just taken my job, he had taken my belief in myself. Days bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of rejection and ramen noodles. But even in the deepest troughs of my despair, my analytical mind kept turning, sifting through the wreckage of my career for clues. I replayed every meeting, every conversation, every email exchange from my final months at the company. Most of it was just noise, the static of corporate life. But a few details stuck out, like sharp stones in soft mud. Chekhov's guns, waiting for a third act. The first was a memory of David in the viewing room of our primary focus group facility. We were observing a session for a different project, and he was in a particularly smug mood. He spent the entire 2 hours mocking the participants behind the one-way mirror. He laughed at one woman's accent, made cruel jokes about another's clothing, and was particularly fixated on a man who insisted on having his bottled water served at room temperature. "Look at these troglodytes," he'd whispered to me, his breath smelling of stale coffee and self-satisfaction. "This is why they need us, Chloe. To tell them what to want." I had found it repulsive then, but now I saw it for what it was, a critical character flaw. He didn't see consumers as people. He saw them as a stupid, malleable mass to be manipulated. He underestimated them. And he would assume his enemies did, too. The second clue was buried on a forgotten USB drive I'd used to back up some personal files. On it was a copy of the master recruitment screener for the Nightingale project. It was my work, a complex document designed to weed out professional testers and find authentic, qualified participants from very specific demographic and psychographic pools. It detailed every question, every desired response, every knockout criterion. It was the key to the castle, the very blueprint for constructing the perfect focus group participant. A participant who could say exactly what the recruiters wanted to hear. The third clue was the most esoteric. I remembered a frantic email chain from about a year ago. The audio system in the main viewing room, Room A, the one they always used for high-stakes projects, had a peculiar glitch. The sensitive microphones in the testing room could, if the gain was turned up too high, occasionally pick up loud conversations from behind the mirror. An IT technician had confirmed it, writing, "Recommend keeping vocal-level discipline in the viewing room to avoid potential feedback or audio bleed." The issue was deemed too intermittent and expensive to fix. It was a forgotten footnote in a long list of facility maintenance issues. But to me, it felt like a whisper of opportunity. These details were just fragments, disconnected and useless on their own. They swirled in the back of my mind, symbols of a life that was no longer mine. I saw David's sneering face, the pages of the screener, the IT technician's warning. They were ghosts of a past I couldn't escape, reminders of the injustice I had no power to correct. The pit of my despair had become my home, and I was starting to accept that there was no way out. I was just another casualty of the corporate world, a footnote in David's triumphant story. The text message arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a day indistinguishable from any other in my colorless new life. It was from Sarah, a junior analyst I had mentored, one of the few people who had sent a discreet, "I'm so sorry" message after I was fired. She now worked part-time as a hostess at Insight Market Research, the very facility where we'd conducted all our focus groups. Her text was short, but it hit me like a defibrillator paddle to the chest. "He's here, David, in viewing room A. He's personally observing the final pre-launch focus group for Nightingale. Told the staff he wanted a victory lap before the product ships. The smug bastard is practically glowing." I read the message 3 times, a victory lap. The image bloomed in my mind with sickening clarity. David, lounging in the plush viewing room chair, sipping a complimentary coffee, his face illuminated by the glow of the focus group on the other side of the mirror. He would be watching a hand-picked group of consumers, all carefully screened to love the product, validating his fraudulent report. He would be there to gloat, to bask in the final confirmation of his genius, his triumph over me. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, shattering break, but a quiet, seismic shift. The grief, the self-pity, the suffocating fog of depression, it all burned away in a flash of pure, clarifying rage. The pain that had been a weight, dragging me down into the abyss, suddenly became fuel. It transformed, hardening from a liquid sorrow into something solid, sharp, and cold. A weapon. He was in viewing room A. The room with the glitchy audio. He was observing a focus group recruited using my screener. And he was a man who believed consumers were troglodytes, easily led and easily dismissed. For the first time in months, I didn't see the wreckage of my past. I saw a path forward. A narrow, treacherous, and deeply satisfying path. The fragments of memory, David's arrogance, the screener document, the audio flaw, slammed together in my mind. No longer random pieces of shrapnel, but the interlocking components of a machine. A machine for revenge. I stood up from my couch, the phone still clutched in my hand. My reflection in the dark screen of my TV showed a woman I barely recognized, pale, tired, haunted. But in her eyes, a flicker of the old fire had returned, burning brighter and hotter than ever before. David wanted a victory lap. I was going to give him a front row seat to the most spectacular crash and burn in corporate history. And the best part, he would be the one behind the wheel. The strategist in me, the part of me David had tried and failed to kill, was wide awake, and she was ready to work. The first step was to build my Trojan horse. I dug out the USB drive and opened the Nightingale recruitment screener. It felt like reading an old diary. Every question was a breadcrumb leading to a specific type of person. A tech-savvy early adopter, aged 35-45, household income over $100K, with a stated preference for premium, design-forward electronics. I knew this profile inside and out. I had created it. Now I would become it. Chloe Evans was unemployable. But Brenda Wallace, a freelance graphic designer from the suburbs with a love for new gadgets and a flexible schedule, was a recruiter's dream. I crafted her persona with the meticulous detail of a novelist. Brenda lived in a respectable zip code, had 2 kids in private school, and followed all the right tech influencers on social media. I created a new email address, a disposable phone number, and even a bare-bones online portfolio for her fictional design business. Next, I found the online portal for the recruiting agency Insight used. I filled out the application as Brenda, hitting every keyword, every desired demographic marker. 2 days later, I got the call. A cheerful, overworked recruiter ran me through the initial questions. I played the part of Brenda perfectly, enthusiastic but not desperate, knowledgeable but not an expert. I was exactly who they were looking for. I passed the first hurdle, but I couldn't get complacent. I needed to know if David had his thumb on the scales. I sent Sarah a carefully worded text. "How's the Nightingale recruitment going? Hearing any weird directives from on high?" Her reply came an hour later. Total lockdown. David's personally vetting the final participant list. He wants enthusiastic brand ambassadors. Read, people who won't say anything negative. This confirmed my suspicion. The fix was in. He wasn't just observing, he was curating his own audience, building a choir to sing the praises of his disastrous product. This made my mission harder, but also infinitely more satisfying. My voice wouldn't just be one of dissent, it would be the lone note of truth in a chorus of manufactured praise. Before fully committing, I decided to test the waters, to send up a small flare to see who, if anyone, was paying attention. Using a public library computer and a secure email service, I sent an anonymous message to a mid-level marketing director I knew to be ambitious and slightly paranoid. The subject line was question about Nightingale data. The body was simple. A discrepancy was noted in the Q3 consumer sentiment projections for Project Nightingale. The initial findings seemed to contradict the final report. Might be worth double-checking the raw data before the launch. I didn't expect a reply. The point was to see if the message created any ripples. I asked Sarah to keep an ear out. For 2 days, there was silence. Then, Sarah texted me a photo of a new memo posted in the company break room. It was from David. The subject was commitment to discretion and project security. It was a paranoid screed, full of thinly veiled threats about corporate espionage, reminders of ironclad NDAs, and a new protocol for handling sensitive project data. My little email had spooked him. It told me 2 things. First, no one had dared to question his doctored report, and second, he was terrified that someone might. He was ruling by fear, and his fortress had a crack in it. A crack just big enough for Brenda Wallace to slip through. The phone rang 2 days before the focus group. It was the recruiting agency again, for the final screening. But the voice on the other end wasn't the cheerful recruiter from before. It was sharper, more severe. "This is Janice from the project lead's office," she said, her tone implying I should be impressed. Janice. David's executive assistant, a woman whose loyalty was legendary and whose competence was non-existent. She was his gatekeeper, his attack poodle. My anonymous email had clearly made David so paranoid that he'd sixed his most trusted sycophant on the recruitment process itself. This was his counterattack. A clumsy, predictable move, but a dangerous one. Janice knew me on sight. A phone screening was one thing, but if she were there on the day, my plan was dead. I took a deep breath and channeled Brenda. "Oh, hello, Janice. It's so exciting to be this close to the finish line." Her questions were blunt, clearly fed to her by David. "Brenda, are you familiar with our brand's other products? What is it about our company that you admire most? On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend a product you love to your friends?" It was a loyalty test. A search for compliant cheerleaders. I gave her exactly what she wanted. I gushed about their mostly mediocre, past products. I praised their innovative spirit and bold design language, using the exact corporate jargon David loved. I told her I was a 10 out of 10 for recommending products, that my friends all called me the gadget guru. I laid it on so thick I felt my teeth ache. "Excellent," Janice said, her voice thawing slightly. "We'll see you on Thursday at 6 p.m. Please bring a photo ID." I hung up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was in, but the victory felt fragile. David was on high alert. He had inserted his own people into the process. This was no longer a simple infiltration. It was a high-wire act with no safety net. A new fear began to creep in. I was relying entirely on Sarah. What if she was discovered? The next day, my fear almost became reality. I had asked Sarah for one more piece of intel, a confirmation of who would be in the viewing room with David. Was the CEO coming? Other executives? Knowing the audience would be crucial. She texted me back, "Going to check the schedule now." An hour passed, then 2. My stomach twisted itself into a knot. I pictured security guards escorting her out just as they had done to me. I was putting her career, her livelihood, at risk for my revenge. The weight of it was crushing. Finally, a text came through. It wasn't from her usual number. New phone. Old one is at the bottom of my purse, turned off. Janice saw me looking at the executive schedule for room A, asked me why I needed to know. I told her I was checking the catering order. I don't think she bought it. Chloe, this is getting really dangerous. He's watching everyone. The message sent a chill down my spine. The second betrayal wasn't from Sarah. It was the realization of how easily my plan could betray her. David's paranoia was creating a panopticon, and we were both trapped under his gaze. For a moment, I considered calling it off. It wasn't fair to risk Sarah's future for my past. I texted her back. Sarah, you don't have to do this. Get out now. It's not worth it. Her reply was instantaneous. He cornered me in the hallway an hour ago and asked me if I'd heard from you. He called you that hysterical woman. Said he did you a favor by firing you. I'm in, Chloe, all the way. Thorne is confirmed to be in the viewing room with him. Let's burn him to the ground. Her loyalty, her courage, was a gut punch. It solidified my resolve. This was no longer just for me. It was for Sarah. It was for everyone who had ever been belittled, underestimated, or erased by a man like David. The fear didn't vanish, but it was now joined by a cold, righteous fury. The stage was set. The audience was arriving. It was time for Brenda Wallace to make her debut. The day of the focus group, I was a bundle of meticulously controlled nerves. I dressed the part of Brenda to perfection. Tastefully expensive jeans, a silk blouse that was just casual enough, and a designer handbag that signaled both her income bracket and consumer tastes. I did my makeup to look polished but approachable. Looking in the mirror, I saw a stranger, a pleasant suburbanite with no hint of the avenging fury simmering just beneath the surface. Chloe Evans was gone. Brenda Wallace was ready for her close-up. I arrived at the Insight facility exactly 15 minutes early, punctual, but not overly eager. As I signed in, I scanned the reception area, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. No Janice. That was the first good sign. Sarah was at the front desk, her expression a perfect mask of professional calm. She handed me my name tag, Brenda, and a clipboard of forms, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. It was the only acknowledgement that passed between us. In that brief touch, I felt a current of solidarity, a silent promise. We're doing this? I was escorted to a waiting area with the other 7 participants. I sized them up instantly, my old analyst instincts kicking in. They were exactly as I'd predicted. 3 men, 4 other women, all in their late 30s or early 40s, all dressed in the casual uniform of the affluent professional. They were David's hand-picked choir, chosen for their enthusiasm and propensity to spend. They chatted amiably amongst themselves, excited to be part of an exclusive preview. They had no idea they were about to become instruments in corporate assassination. Finally, a peppy moderator named Kate led us into the focus group room. It was exactly as I remembered. The sterile white table, the uncomfortable chairs, the bowl of wilting mints in the center. And on the far wall, the one-way mirror, a great, black, unblinking eye. It felt like a physical presence in the room, a void that was watching me. I knew that behind it, David was settling into his chair, a smug smile on his face, ready for his victory lap. I could almost feel his arrogance radiating through the glass. I chose a seat directly facing the mirror, a silent challenge. Watch closely, I thought. The show is about to begin. Kate began with the usual warm-up questions. For the first 20 minutes, I played my part beautifully. As Brenda, I was agreeable, enthusiastic, and just a little bit vapid. When the prototype for Project Nightingale was revealed, I cooed along with the others. "Oh, the design is so sleek," one woman said. "I love that color," another added. I nodded in agreement, offering a simple, "It's very modern." I was lulling them, lulling David, into a false sense of security. I let the group build a cushion of positive feedback, a soft bed for the knife I was about to slide in. The moderator moved on to functionality. "So, let's talk about the user experience. What are your first impressions of the interface?" This was my moment. The other participants offered vague praise. "It seems pretty straightforward. I like the big icons. I let a small, thoughtful frown crease my brow, the very picture of a concerned consumer. Kate, I said, my voice gentle and hesitant. I might just be being silly, but I'm a little confused. The instructions said it was intuitive, but I've been trying to find the main settings menu for the last 5 minutes. Am I missing something obvious? I held the device up, feigning incompetence. A man across from me, who had been the most vocal supporter, took the bait. Oh, it's easy, he said, confidently tapping his own device. His smile faltered. Wait, it was here a second ago. A ripple of confusion went through the room. Suddenly, the participants weren't just looking at the sleek exterior, they were actually trying to use the device. You know, Brenda's right, said a woman to my left. It's not very clear where to go to change the Wi-Fi settings. Kate, the moderator, tried to steer the conversation back to positive territory. Okay, a little bit of a learning curve, that's normal for new tech. What about the battery life? Our engineers are very proud of the new power cell. I waited a beat. Well, I said, tilting my head with an air of innocence. I noticed it has to be charged every 3 hours. My old device lasts for a whole week. Is that because of this lovely shiny light on the front? It's very pretty, but I'd rather it last through a whole workday, you know? The room fell silent. It was the elephant in the room, the critical flaw I had highlighted in my original report, the one David had buried under a mountain of fabricated projections. The man who couldn't find the settings menu chimed in. She has a point. 3 hours is ridiculous. I wouldn't even make it through my morning meetings. The dam had broken. The carefully constructed facade of praise crumbled into an avalanche of criticism. My innocent questions had given them permission to be honest. One by one, the other participants began to voice the exact same concerns my research had uncovered months ago. And it feels a bit cheap, doesn't it? Someone ventured. It gets really hot when you use it for more than 10 minutes, another added. The main feature, the one they advertise, it keeps crashing on me. Kate was completely out of her depth. The session was spiraling out of her control. She looked desperately towards the one-way mirror, as if pleading for help from the unseen watchers. I looked at it too, but with a cold, triumphant smile playing on my lips. I pictured David behind that glass, his face contorting from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to dawning horror, and finally to pure, impotent rage. I imagined Thorne standing beside him, his expression hardening, the praise for David's bold vision turning to ash in his mouth. I had not only proven my original report was correct, I was making David watch, in real time, as his career imploded. Each complaint from a participant was another nail in his coffin. The final blow was yet to come. With 10 minutes left in the session, I delivered the coup de grace. There's one last thing, I said, my voice now carrying a new weight, the Brenda persona melting away to reveal the sharp-edged analyst beneath. When I was trying to sync the device with my phone, it asked for permission to access my contacts, my microphone, and my location data, even when the app is turned off. That seems like a major security risk. Is it safe? The word safe hung in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. The atmosphere in the room shifted from disappointment to genuine alarm. The participants started murmuring to each other, their faces etched with concern. They weren't just dissatisfied consumers anymore, they were potential victims of a data breach, a liability. The one thing a CEO fears more than a failed product is a class action lawsuit. The moderator, pale and flustered, quickly wrapped up the session. Thank you all for your time and your very candid feedback, she stammered, avoiding eye contact with the mirror. As we stood up to leave, I executed my final, premeditated move. I accidentally fumbled with my handbag, letting my wallet spill onto the floor. Several cards scattered across the carpet. A Starbucks gift card, a credit card, and face up, my driver's license, with my real name clearly visible. Kate, the moderator, bent down to help me. She picked up the license, her eyes widening as she read the name. Chloe Evans, she whispered, recognition dawning on her face. She remembered me from previous sessions when I was the client. She looked from the ID to my face, her expression a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The whole thing, my presence, the trajectory of the conversation, it all clicked into place for her. Before she could say another word, I took the ID from her hand, a small, knowing smile on my lips. I turned and looked directly at the one-way mirror, into the heart of the darkness where I knew my tormentor was watching. I spoke in a clear, level voice, loud enough to be certain. "Please tell Mr. Thorne that Chloe Evans has a few more notes for him," I said, my gaze unflinching. I leaned in just a little, letting the old knowledge of that glitchy microphone guide my volume. "And tell him my consulting fee is now double my old salary." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving a stunned moderator, 7 disillusioned consumers, and the deafening silence of a career being annihilated behind me. I didn't look back. Brenda Wallace was gone. Chloe Evans was back. I didn't wait by the phone. The sweet, electric hum of victory was enough to sustain me. I went home, packed a small suitcase, and drove to a coastal town a few hours away. For 3 days, I walked on the beach, slept without the aid of medication, and ate fresh seafood, tasting food for the first time in months. I turned my phone off, severing the last tie to the world I had just upended. I didn't need to know the details of the fallout. I had seen the ending in David's imaginary, horrified face behind the mirror. The rest was just paperwork. When I finally returned to my apartment and switched my phone on, it exploded with a backlog of notifications. There were dozens of missed calls and texts from numbers I didn't recognize. A slew of new connection requests on my professional networking site, and one voicemail. It was from a number I knew by heart, Marcus Thorne's private line. His voice was different from how I remembered it. The arrogant, dismissive boom was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost humbled tone. He didn't apologize, men like Thorne don't, but the message was clear. He spoke of a significant strategic realignment and a renewed focus on data-driven authenticity. He mentioned that David was no longer with the company. He didn't offer me David's old job. He offered me something better. He wanted to create a new position for me, Vice President of Consumer Insights and Strategy, reporting directly to him. He was offering me the power to build a new department from the ground up, to ensure that the truth, in all its inconvenient glory, would always have a seat at the table. 2 weeks later, I walked back through the doors of the company headquarters, not as a ghost, but as a kingmaker. The security guard who had escorted me out now nodded at me with a newfound respect. The colleagues who had averted their eyes now met my gaze with a mixture of awe and fear. They knew. The story of the focus group had already become a corporate legend. My new office was on the executive floor, twice the size of my old one, with a panoramic view of the city. It was a clear symbol of my reclaimed status, my vindication. But the real prize wasn't the office or the title. It was the feeling that settled deep in my bones as I stood looking out at the skyline, a feeling of profound, unburdened liberation. I had been dragged into the abyss, stripped of everything I thought defined me. And in that darkness, I had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. I had fought my way back not by playing their game, but by creating my own. The scars of the betrayal would always be there, a reminder of the cost of truth in a world that often prefers comfortable lies. But they were no longer open wounds. They were the hard-won emblems of my resilience, proof that even after the most devastating fall, it is possible to rise again, stronger and more certain of who you are than ever before. The game was over, and I had won. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Which part of the journey did you connect with the most? Share your thoughts in the comments.